What if Katt Williams didn't just give an interview, but dropped a warning nobody took seriously? Because after his sit-down with Shannon Sharpe, things started lining up in ways that feel impossible to ignore. Headlines, patterns, artists going quiet, and now people are asking one chilling question. Was he predicting what's about to happen next? What if this wasn't just another celebrity interview, but a warning hiding in plain sight? What if Katt Williams didn't just sit down to talk, but tried to tell everyone something they weren't ready to hear? Because months after that conversation aired, things started shifting in ways that felt too precise to ignore. Names began fading from the spotlight. Headlines stacked up one after another. And suddenly, what once sounded like wild speculation started to feel uncomfortably real. It all traces back to the moment Katt walked into that room with Shannon Sharpe and delivered what many are now calling one of the most unsettling interviews in entertainment history. There was no hesitation, no softening of words. He spoke about power, real power operating behind the scenes. The kind that doesn't just influence careers but decides them. Who rises, who stalls, and according to him, who disappears entirely. Then came the line that stopped people cold. He suggested that artists who don't cooperate, those who resist, who question, who see too much, don't just get pushed aside, they get erased. At the time, it sounded extreme, easy to dismiss. People laughed it off, labeled it conspiracy, said he had gone too far. But then reality started catching up. The situation surrounding Sean Diddy Combs escalated fast, raids, investigations, legal pressure building in real time. At the same time, more artists' stories began ending abruptly. Different places, different circumstances, but the same eerie outcome. And just like that, people went back to that interview, rewatching, reanalyzing, listening closer this time, trying to answer one question that suddenly didn't feel so crazy anymore. Was Katt actually warning us? Because behind the noise, a deeper narrative began to form. According to whispers and insiders, there are patterns, lists, even names connected not by coincidence but by something far more deliberate. And if even a fraction of what he implied holds weight, then the next headline might not be random at all. To understand why this hits so hard, you have to understand Katt Williams himself. He's not someone chasing attention or trying to insert himself into controversy. He's been inside the system for decades, watching, listening, learning. From the early days of stand-up to becoming one of the most recognizable voices in comedy, he's built a reputation not just for being funny, but for being fearless. And that's what makes people uneasy. Because while most celebrities learn to navigate the system quietly, Katt built his identity on doing the opposite. He questions, he challenges, he says what others won't even whisper. And over time, that came with consequences. Fewer invitations, fewer opportunities, a noticeable distance between him and the industry's inner circle. But according to him, that distance wasn't accidental. It wasn't about controversy. It was about refusal to play along, refusal to cooperate with something he never fully defined, but strongly hinted at. And that raises a bigger question. What does cooperate actually mean? That question becomes even heavier when you look at the environment he's describing. The music industry, especially hip-hop, has always been intense, competitive, sometimes dangerous. But over the years, something more complex began to take shape, something harder to explain. It wasn't just about rivalries anymore. It started to feel like patterns. Artists rising quickly, then vanishing just as fast. Voices getting louder, then suddenly going silent. Stories beginning, but never getting the chance to finish. Look back at legends like Tupac Shakur and the notorious B.I.G., two icons at the height of their influence, both openly speaking about pressure, control, and the darker sides of the industry. Both gone within months of each other. And decades later, questions still surround what really happened. And they weren't the last. Over time, more names were added, more tragedies, more confusion. The cycle repeated so often that it started to feel less like coincidence and more like a pattern people couldn't fully explain, but also couldn't ignore. That's the world Katt stepped into during that interview. But instead of speaking in generalities, he got specific. He talked about levels, layers within the industry that most people never see. He described opportunities that come with conditions, invitations that carry expectations, paths to success that aren't as straightforward as they seem. And then he said something that changed everything. "I know things I shouldn't know, and they know I know." That statement alone shifted the entire conversa. Tian. Because now it wasn't just speculation, it was perspective from someone who had been close enough to see how things actually operate. And suddenly, old clips started resurfacing. Other artists hinting at similar experiences. Conversations that once felt random now seemed connected. Even casual fans started asking questions they'd never considered before. Why do some artists speak out and then disappear? Why do certain careers explode overnight while others stall with no clear reason? Why do tragedies keep following similar patterns? And most importantly, why did so many of Katt Williams' warnings start to feel real after he said them? Because as the headlines kept coming, the timing became harder to dismiss. Social media didn't just react, it investigated. People broke down every word, every moment, every connection. Some called him brave, others said he was reckless. But almost everyone agreed on one thing: something about this didn't feel normal anymore. And just like that, the question changed. It was, did he go too far? It became something much darker. What if he didn't go far enough? Because according to a wave of online discussions, insider whispers, and viral breakdowns spreading across every major platform, Katt Williams may not have just been exposing what already happened behind the scenes. He may have been pointing directly at what's coming next. And that idea is what changed everything, because it reframes the entire conversation. It's no longer about looking backward and trying to decode old industry secrets. It's about looking forward and asking a much more unsettling question. What if the next chapter is already in motion? A future where certain artists aren't just rising or falling naturally, but being watched. A future where patterns don't just repeat by coincidence, but follow a structure that most people never see. A future where the next names aren't random headlines, but part of something that's already been set into motion behind closed doors. And if even a fraction of that is true, then this story stops being entertainment. It stops being gossip. It becomes something much heavier. Something that feels less like a narrative and more like a warning. Because after that now infamous sit-down with Shannon Sharpe, people didn't just move on to the next viral moment. They stayed. They went back. They started digging, rewatching every second, slowing clips down frame by frame, listening not just to what was said, but how it was said. The pauses, the tone shifts, the moments where Katt seemed to choose his words carefully, like he was walking a line between saying too much and not saying enough. And what they started finding didn't calm anything down. It made things worse. Because according to multiple viral breakdowns, Katt wasn't just speaking in broad, vague ideas. He was hinting, dropping fragments, describing patterns in a way that felt deliberate, not naming every name directly, but giving just enough for people to start connecting dots on their own. And once the internet starts connecting dots, it doesn't stop. That's when the idea of a list began to spread. At first, it sounded like every other internet theory, dramatic, exaggerated, designed to go viral for a few days before disappearing. People brushed it off, laughed at it, said it was reaching too far, but then something unexpected happened. The timelines people were building started lining up a little too well. Fans began pointing out how Katt repeatedly referenced a very specific type of artist. Not just anyone, but artists who fit certain patterns. Artists who turned down major deals. Artists who stayed independent when the industry expected them to sign. Artists who spoke openly about ownership, control, and pressure behind the scenes. Artists who at some point seemed to shift, behavior changing, energy different, presence less visible. And once those categories were laid out, certain names started coming up again and again. Not confirmed, not official, but repeated enough that people started paying attention, watching more closely, listening more carefully to everything those artists said and did. Because here's the part that unsettled people the most. Katt didn't just talk about danger in a vague sense. He talked about consequences. He described situations where artists were allegedly approached with offers that sounded almost impossible to refuse. Massive deals, instant exposure, career-defining opportunities that could launch someone straight to the top. The kind of offers most people spend their entire lives chasing. But according to him, those offers weren't free. They came with expectations, conditions that weren't always visible on paper. And when someone said no, when they stepped away instead of stepping in, that's when things started to change. Support would fade. Connections would go silent. Doors that once seemed open would suddenly close. And in some cases, according to the theory gaining traction online, it didn't stop at business. It escalated into something far more serious, something harder to explain, something that, when viewed in isolation, might seem like coincidence, but when viewed as part of a pattern, starts to feel very different. That's where the first major shift in the conversation happened, because people didn't just rely on what Katt said anymore. They started comparing it to real-world cases, looking at artists who built their careers outside the traditional system, artists who spoke openly about ownership, about refusing to give up control, about navigating an industry that didn't always welcome independence. And when they revisited old interviews, old clips, old moments, it felt different this time. Lines that once seemed casual now sounded loaded. Comments that were once ignored now felt like warnings hiding in plain sight. Clips started circulating rapidly. Artists talking about pressure behind the scenes, talking about turning down deals, talking about feeling watched, targeted, unsafe. At the time, those statements barely made headlines. They were brushed off as exaggeration or just part of the industry's usual drama. But now, in the context of everything Katt had said, those same clips were being reinterpreted entirely. And that's when the fear really started to spread. Because suddenly, it wasn't just about understanding what had already happened. It became about trying to predict what might happen next. Online forums lit up overnight. TikTok threads started breaking down timelines in obsessive detail. Twitter debates turned into full-scale investigations, with users compiling lists, cross-referencing interviews, tracking patterns in ways that felt almost investigative. Some claimed there were at least 10 names being quietly discussed behind the scenes, not confirmed, not public, but circulating. A list that allegedly included rising stars, independent voices, and artists who had recently started speaking out in ways that didn't align with the industry's expectations. Now, to be clear, none of this has been proven. There's no official confirmation, no verified source backing it up. But that didn't stop the momentum, because once people start connecting dots, especially in an environment filled with mystery and unanswered questions, the narrative builds fast. And the more dots people connected, the more uncomfortable everything became. Because right in the middle of all this speculation, something else happened. Another headline, another loss, another situation that, on the surface, had its own explanation, but still seemed to fit into the broader pattern people were already talking about. Different city, different circumstances, same outcome. And just like that, the conversation shifted again. Now it didn't feel like theory anymore. It felt like something unfolding in real time. And then came the detail that pushed everything even further. According to multiple breakdowns, Katt didn't just talk about individuals. He talked about a system, a structure, something bigger than any one person, a network of influence that operates through access, power, and control, not through visible leadership but through quiet coordination. A system that, according to him, rewards compliance and punishes resistance. And if that's true, then it changes everything. because it means this isn't about targeting random individuals. It's about patterns, about behavior, about choices. People who don't follow the script. People who don't accept the deals. People who try to move differently. And that's where things take an even darker turn. Because some fans started noticing changes happening right now, not in the past, not in old interviews, but in the present moment. Certain artists appearing less in public, increased security, strange or cryptic social media posts that suddenly felt like they carried hidden meaning. Again, nothing confirmed, but enough to make people watch more closely. And then a clip resurfaced that many believe was overlooked the first time around. An artist, months before any of this started trending, speaking openly about how the industry isn't what people think it is. At the time, it barely made noise, but now, in this new context, it's being treated like a warning that came too early. Because when you combine that with everything else, Katt's interview, the patterns, the timing, it creates a narrative that's hard to ignore, even if you don't fully believe it. And this is where the first real twist becomes impossible to shake. What if this isn't just about exposing the past? What if it's about predicting the future? Because according to the theory gaining traction, those names people keep mentioning, they're not random. They're connected, not by coincidence, but by decisions, by choices, by what they refuse to do. And if even part of that theory is true, then the next headline won't shock the people paying attention. It will confirm their worst fears. But just when it seemed like Piop, we're starting to piece everything together, another shift happened, one that flipped the entire narrative again. Because now it wasn't just fans talking. It felt like the industry itself was reacting. And that reaction was subtle but powerful. Interviews started getting uncomfortable. Questions about Katt Williams were brushed aside quickly, almost like people didn't want to engage with the topic at all. You could see it in real time, the shift in body language, the hesitation, the way conversations were redirected the moment his name came up. And that silence spoke louder than any statement. Because think about it, in an industry where everyone responds to everything, every rumor, every piece of drama, every trending topic, why was this the one conversation so many people avoided? That silence didn't calm anything down. It made everything louder. Meanwhile, online, the situation spiraled even further. Clips were going viral by the hour. People dissecting every word, every pause, every expression from that interview, catching details that had gone completely unnoticed the first time. And slowly, the narrative began to shift again. This wasn't just, Katt said something crazy. It became something much more unsettling. What if he told us exactly what's about to happen, and we just didn't recognize it at the time? And the moment that question took hold, that's when everything exploded. Threads started trending, conversations spread across every platform, and suddenly, what began as one interview turned into something much bigger. Not just a story, but a possibility people couldn't ignore anymore. By the time the conversation hit that point, it wasn't slowing down, it was accelerating. People were building timelines, lining up moments from that interview with real-world events involving Sean Diddy, Combs, and other major figures, trying to see if there was any connection hidden beneath the surface. And the deeper they went, the more intense it became. On TikTok, creators were dropping breakdown after breakdown, pulling in millions of views, each one claiming to spot something new, something missed the first time. Some weren't even calling it an exposé anymore. They were calling it a countdown, a build-up, a sequence of events that hadn't fully played out yet. One viral post kept resurfacing everywhere. Go back and watch it again. And the unsettling part, people did. They went back, rewatched the entire interview, slowed it down, paused on certain lines, focused on specific words. And once that idea took hold that maybe something had been missed the first time, there was no undoing it. Because what followed was even more dangerous. People started naming names. Not officially, not confirmed, but based on patterns, behavior, and everything Katt Williams had hinted at. Certain artists kept coming up again and again in these conversations, the same ones being discussed across forums, comment sections, and threads that seemed to grow by the hour. And that's when the tone shifted from curiosity to fear. Because fans didn't just talk anymore, they started watching specific artists closely, tracking their movements, noticing changes in real time, artists going quiet, posts suddenly disappearing, public appearances getting canceled without explanation, security around certain figures tightening overnight. Now maybe all of that has perfectly reasonable explanations. Maybe it's timing, maybe it's business, maybe it's coincidence. But once people believe they're seeing a pattern, coincidence stops feeling like coincidence. And then came the moment that flipped everything again. An older clip of Katt Williams resurfaced, but this time people didn't hear it the same way. Before, it sounded like he was talking about danger. Now, it sounded like he was talking about timing. He hinted that events don't just happen randomly, that there are moments, windows, where certain things are allowed to unfold. And once people picked up on that, they did what the internet always does. They started comparing dates. The interview, major headlines, legal actions, industry shakeups. And while nobody could prove anything, the alignment felt just close enough to make people uncomfortable. That's when one question started taking over everything. What if this isn't chaos? What if it's planned? That single idea pushed the conversation into overdrive, because now the 10 rappers theory wasn't some niche discussion happening in the background anymore. It was everywhere. Videos, threads, comment sections, entire communities built around analyzing it. Everyone was watching specific artists, watching behavior, watching for any sign, any signal that something might happen next. And the scariest part, people weren't waiting to be surprised anymore. They were expecting it. Because at this point, the entire narrative had flipped. This wasn't about exposing the past anymore. It became about predicting the future, and that changes everything. Exposing something that already happened, that's one kind of risk. But warning people about what might happen next, that's something else entirely. And this is where the focus shifts back to Katt himself. Because he's made it clear multiple times that speaking like this comes with consequences. He's acknowledged the risk. He's hinted at it directly. So the question people can't stop asking is simple but heavy. Why say it anyway? Why put yourself in that position, unless you truly believe what you're saying matters? That question echoed everywhere. Across Twitter threads, video breakdowns, live discussions, people weren't just watching the industry anymore. They were waiting, watching every headline, every shift, every silence, trying to figure out if the next piece of the puzzle was about to fall into place. And just when it felt like the tension couldn't get any higher, the public reaction pushed everything even further into territory nobody expected. Because the audience didn't just react, they split. On one side, you had people pushing back hard, arguing that this was all being blown out of proportion, that fans were connecting dots that weren't actually connected. They called it coincidence, bad luck, the harsh reality of an industry that has always been unpredictable and at times dangerous. They pointed out that tragedies happen, that careers rise and fall, that turning it into some hidden narrative risks creating fear where there might not be any truth. But on the other side, you had people who were completely convinced something deeper was happening. And they weren't quiet about it. They started bringing receipts, old interviews, forgotten clips, lyrics that suddenly felt different when heard through this new lens, moments where artists talked about pressure, about control, about feeling trapped inside a system they couldn't fully escape. Things that once sounded like normal industry talk now felt like warnings. And once that side of the conversation gained momentum, it became unstoppable. Because now, it wasn't just about Katt Williams anymore. It became about every artist who had ever hinted at something being off. Fans started saying, "Go back and listen to what they were saying before everything changed." And when people actually did that, the tone shifted again, this time into something even more uncomfortable. Clips resurfaced of artists talking about turning down deals, talking about choosing independence over major contracts, talking about not trusting certain people or certain situations. At the time, those conversations sounded like strategy, business decisions, personal preferences. Now, they sounded like something else entirely. And that's when the divide between the two sides grew even wider. Because while fans debated, celebrities themselves started reacting, but not directly. Some posted cryptic messages that people immediately tried to decode. Some went completely silent. Others shifted their content entirely, avoiding anything even remotely connected to the topic. And even though none of it confirmed anything, it added fuel to the fire. Because once again, silence felt loud. Fans began interpreting everything. A deleted post, suspicious. A canceled show, concerning. A vague caption, a hidden message. And once that level of scrutiny begins, every move starts to feel intentional, even when it might not be. Meanwhile, discussions surrounding Sean Diddy Combs continued to circulate, with people repeatedly pointing out how quickly things escalated after his name became part of the conversation. Whether connected or not, the timing kept coming up again and again. And eventually, the conversation reached a point where it couldn't go back. Because now, people weren't just discussing theories. They were choosing sides. Either you believe this is all coincidence, or you believe there's a pattern no one wants to acknowledge. There was no middle ground anymore. And the more people argued, the bigger it got. Searches exploded. Videos pulled in millions of views overnight. Streams surged as more people tried to understand what was happening. Because deep down, everyone was asking the same question. What if even a small part of this is true? And that question alone was enough to keep people locked in. Because if it is true, then this isn't just entertainment anymore. It stops feeling like content and starts feeling like something much bigger, something darker, something that doesn't end when the video ends. And just when it seemed like the conversation had reached its peak, when it felt like there was nowhere else for it to go, another shift happened. This time, quieter, but far more unsettling. People started noticing something they had ignored for years. How fast the industry moves on. A tragedy hits headlines and then disappears just as quickly. One story replaces another. Attention shifts. The narrative resets. And before anyone can really process what happened, it's already LD news. But this time, something was different. People weren't letting it go. They kept bringing it back, reposting old clips, reanalyzing interviews, connecting moments across months, even years, refusing to let the story fade the way it always had before. Because now, every new headline wasn't just being consumed, it was being compared. Compared to everything Katt Williams had said. Compared to every pattern people thought they were starting to see. And that's what changed everything. This time, people weren't watching moments. They were watching patterns. And once you start looking at patterns, you begin to notice things you can't unsee. Small details, repeated behaviors, similar outcomes that don't feel so random anymore. And that leads to the most uncomfortable realization of all. If there really is a pattern, then the next event isn't random. It's expected. And if it's expected, then somewhere out there, someone might already be closer to that moment than anyone realizes. That thought alone kept the tension alive, because nobody knew what was coming next. But it felt like something was. And the scariest part, people stopped asking if. They started asking when. And just when it felt like the intensity couldn't climb any higher, the story took one final turn, one that even skeptics couldn't ignore. Because up until this point, everything had been built on reactions, on speculation, on people connecting dots that may or may not have been connected. But then something else surfaced. A pattern inside the pattern. People started noticing that the same type of artists kept showing up in these conversations again and again. Not just random names, but specific kinds of artists. Independent voices. Artists who spoke openly about ownership. Artists who rejected major deals. Artists who publicly questioned the system or said they didn't fully trust it. And when you line that up with everything Katt hinted at, it starts to feel less random and more deliberate. Now, to be clear, none of this is confirmed. There's no official proof, no verified source tying it all together. But that didn't stop the theory from evolving. Because the question changed again. It wasn't just who anymore. It became why these artists. And the answer that kept coming up again and again was control. The idea that as long as artists follow a certain path, everything runs smoothly, careers grow, opportunities expand, support stays consistent. But the moment someone steps outside that path, things change. Opportunities disappear. Support fades. Pressure builds. And in some cases, at least according to the theory, things go further than anyone wants to admit. That idea alone was enough to keep the conversation alive. Because it reframes everything. It's no longer about random events. It becomes about consequences. And if that's true, then the most unsettling part is what's already happened. It's what could happen next. Because if there really is a system, and if that system reacts to certain behavior, then every artist currently pushing boundaries, speaking out, refusing to fall in line, could be at risk. And that's exactly where the audience shifted again. Fans weren't just watching from a distance anymore. They were paying close attention. Every interview, every live stream, every post, not looking for proof, just signs. And that level of attention changes everything. Because now the audience isn't passive. They're active, observing in real time, waiting to see if the pattern continues. And here's where it gets even more complex. Because in multiple past conversations, Katt Williams made something very clear. He said he wasn't trying to create fear. He claimed he was trying to wake people up. According to him, the goal wasn't to scare the public. It was to shine a light on something that had been ignored for too long. And whether you believe him or not, that intention changes how people interpret everything. Because people don't usually risk everything just to create noise. They take risks when they believe something matters. And that brings everything to one final, unavoidable question. What happens next? Because if everything we've seen so far is only the beginning, then this story isn't over. Not even close. There are still names being discussed. Still patterns being analyzed. Still questions with no clear answers. And the tension, it's still building. Because the truth is, nobody can say for certain what's real and what is. But one thing is undeniable. The conversation has already changed. People are paying attention now. They're questioning things they never questioned before, looking deeper, watching closer. And once that shift happens, there's no going back. Because even if all of this turns out to be coincidence, it doesn't feel like coincidence anymore. And that feeling, that uncertainty, that constant question of what if, That's what keeps this story alive. That's why millions of people are still watching, still waiting, still trying to figure out, is this just a theory? Or is something bigger unfolding right in front of us? Because if the pattern continues, then the next update won't just be another headline. It might be the moment that changes everything. So now it comes down to you. After everything you've seen, everything you've heard, where do you stand? Do you think Katt Williams was speaking out of frustration? Or do you think he was trying to warn people about something real? Right now, the internet is completely divided. Some people believe this is all coincidence. Others are convinced there's a pattern that can't be ignored. And this is one of those moments where your perspective matters. So say what you think. Do you believe there's a pattern in the industry, or do you think people are reading too much into it? And more importantly, do you think more is about to happen? Because if even a small part of this turns out to be true, then we're not just watching entertainment anymore. We're watching something unfold in real time. So stay alert. Stay watching. Because this story, it's far from over.